Okay, sixth graders, we are now on Thursday, May 21st, and we have another reading to do today called Spies in Petticoats, and that is on page 26. So I'm going to read this, and then you can answer the questions. All right, so let's take a look. During the Civil War, thousands of women served as nurses. They worked in hospitals and on the front lines for the Union and the Confederacy. These angels of the battlefields hold a well-known place in American history. Less known, however, is the fact that hundreds of women also served in a far different capacity. They risked their lives as undercover spies. These women spies came from a variety of backgrounds, from former slaves to fashionable socialites. Yet these very different women shared some valuable traits. Each had detailed knowledge of daily activities and troop movements in the part of the country where she lived. This knowledge made the women very helpful to military leaders, both Union and Confederate. These women also shared a passion for either the Union or the Confederacy, and they were willing to die for it. Across the country, these female spies worked within carefully constructed networks, gathering information and using various means to relay messages. One of the Union's top female spies was a Southern woman named Elizabeth Van Lew. Even though Van Lew lived in the South, she was strongly against slavery. She convinced her own family to free their slaves. She was wealthy and well-educated, and she lived in Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy. When a Union general asked Van Lew to work as a spy, she readily agreed. So the Union was the North in the Civil War, and the Confederates were in the South. All right, number 4. Elizabeth Van Lew enlisted the help of other Union supporters in Richmond to become her couriers. These couriers delivered secret information from her to General Grant, who led the Union troops. She also set up relay stations for the couriers at secret meeting points between Richmond and Grant's headquarters. Van Lew wrote her coded messages in invisible ink, and the messages were often hidden inside hollowed-out vegetables from Van Lew's garden. Because of Van Lew's efforts, General Grant learned how the Confederate Army was defending Richmond. When General Grant and his Union troops captured Richmond, Elizabeth Van Lew proudly flew the Union flag from the roof of her house. General Grant even visited her at her home. He wanted to thank Van Lew in person for her service to the Union. The former slave Harriet Tubman is celebrated for her work as a conductor of the Underground Railroad. She led hundreds of slaves to freedom in the North, and she was also one of the Union's most valuable spies. Because of her work with the Underground Railroad, Tubman knew firsthand all of the land and waterway transportation routes throughout the South. With this knowledge, she was able to map territory behind enemy lines for the Union. Also, because of her work with the Underground Railroad, Tubman had the great respect of many people, especially slaves and former slaves. She enlisted the help of these loyal people as scouts when she set up a vast spy ring for the Union. Led and trained by Tubman, her scouts went on dangerous missions behind enemy lines. Harriet Tubman herself led successful raids along the South Carolina coast in Confederate territory. These raids disturbed supply lines vital to the Confederate Army, and they freed hundreds of slaves. While Elizabeth Van Lew, Harriet Tubman, and many other women worked as spies for the Union, other women were actively spying for the Confederacy. One woman in particular was the Confederacy's master spy. Her name was Rose O'Neal Greenhow. Greenhow was a wealthy widow. She was also a charming hostess. She often invited military and political leaders to her home for social evenings, and she lived in the ideal place for secretly obtaining information about the Union, Washington, D.C. Not only was Washington, D.C. the capital of the United States, it was the headquarters of the Union Army during the Civil War. Rose Greenhow considered herself a Southerner through and through. She would do anything to help the Confederacy win the Civil War. Operating from the Union capital, Greenhow soon organized the war's largest network of Confederate spies. Writing in secret code, she sent her reports by courier. Each courier passed Greenhow's reports to the next courier in a relay system known as the secret line. Rose Greenhow's messages were highly detailed. They described Union troop movements and strategies or plans of action. One of these messages gave urgent information about the Union Army's plan of attack at the First Battle of Bull Run. Greenhow's accurate information led to a victory for the Confederate Army. In 1861, Rose was placed under house arrest by the newly formed Secret Service. Even then, the master spy managed to find out Union secrets and send them to Confederate military leaders. After Rose was released from house arrest, she tried to smuggle gold for the Confederate treasury. However, the boat she was in turned over in rough water. Rose drowned, weighed down by the heavy gold. Ooh, interesting. All right, let's look at the questions. The following question has two parts. First, answer part A, then answer part B. Which of the following best describes the central idea of the passage? A, thousands of women courageously served as nurses during the Civil War. B, Harriet Tubman worked with the Underground Railroad to free hundreds of slaves. C, spies for both the Union and the Confederacy disguised themselves as women. D, women acted as spies for the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War. All right, so these kinds of questions, every single one of these things happened in the story. Okay, so they're all true. And these are what's so hard sometimes, because you want to pick the best one for the central idea. Well, the central idea is about the fact that there were Union and Confederate female or women spies during the Civil War. That's the central message of all of this. Okay, so even though there were thousands of women who courageously served as nurses during the Civil War, that's not part of the central idea, even though it's in the passage and it's very true. Harriet Tubman worked with the Underground Railroad to free hundreds of slaves. Well, you know from learning about Harriet Tubman that this is true, it was in the story, but it's not the central idea of this passage. It could be a central idea of a passage about Harriet Tubman, but it's not the central idea of this passage. Spies for both the Union and Confederacy disguised themselves as women. Well, not so. They weren't men disguised as women, right? And then D, women acted as spies for the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War. That's the central message. Okay, that's what the story is mainly about, the central idea. Okay? All right, let's see if you can do B on your own. Which detail from the passage best supports the answer in part A? Okay, so which one of these best supports what we just said, that women acted as spies for the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War? Let's look at A. One of the Union's top female spies was a Southern woman named Elizabeth Van Lew. B. Also because of her work with the Underground Railroad, Tubman had the great respect of many people, especially slaves and former slaves. C. In 1861, Rose was placed under house arrest by the newly formed Secret Service. And D. They worked in hospitals and on the front lines for the Union and Confederacy. All right, well, which one do you think it is that supports the fact that women acted as spies for the Union and Confederate armies during the Civil War? Which one do you think does that? All right, let's move on. Go back here for just a minute. Okay. Just a little hint on that one. The one about where they worked as in the hospital. They worked in hospitals and on the front lines. Well, it says thousands of women served as nurses. So that particular one is talking about the nurses that were on the front lines. Whoops. Not these spies. So if that one might help you, they always have two that are close and then two that are pretty clear that if you read it closely and carefully, you'll be able to figure it out. So I think we can determine that this is not it, because they here is referring to people who worked as nurses, and that women that worked as nurses. Okay, this isn't telling you anything about the women being spies, and this isn't telling you anything about Tubman being a spy. It's just that she worked to free people. This one of the Union's top female spies, was a Southern woman named Elizabeth Van Lew. That is what's supporting this answer here, where we said women acted as spies. They're actually naming one of the spies there. I hope you can see that. All right, let's move on to 2. What do we have through today? Let's see, we have through 29. Let me see. Yep. All right, so number 2. The author suggests that women spies played an important role during the Civil War. Which 2 sentences from the passage best support this above statement, that women spies played an important role during the Civil War? You're going to put 2 of these that supports that. So let me read them. A. When General Grant and his Union troops captured Richmond, Elizabeth Van Lew proudly flew the Union flag from the roof of her house. B. Greenhough's accurate information led to a victory for the Confederate Army. C. Harriet Tubman herself led successful raids along the South Carolina coast in Confederate territory. D. Even though Van Lew lived in the South, she was strongly against slavery. And E. These women spies came from a variety of backgrounds, from former slaves to fashion socialites. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So you're going to pick the 2 that suggest that women spies played an important role during the Civil War. So which 2 supports that they had an important job to do during the Civil War? Okay. another name or meaning for role is job. Okay? All right. Now we're going to go to 3. Read this sentence from paragraph 2 of the passage, Spies in Petticoats. Across the country, these female spies worked within carefully constructed networks, gathering information and using various means to relay messages. All right, so what does the word networks mean as it is used in this sentence? Okay, so A, systems of computers that share information. B, chains of radio or TV stations linked by satellite. C, structures in which cords, threads, or wires cross. D, groups of people who share similar interests or goals. All right, so it says, across the country, these female spies worked within carefully constructed networks, gathering information and using various means to relay messages. All right, so what do you think there? They couldn't tell everybody about it. There's only a special group of people that could be involved as spies and the networks. In other words, a network is, let's see, once you're out of school and you want a job, you might network. That means that you might call friends of the family to get a job, or you might ask mom or dad to talk to one of their friends and maybe they could hire you. So it's a special group of people. It's not just anyone when you network. Okay. All right. And number 4, in Spies in Petticoats, the author believes that female spies were clever and resourceful. Which sentence from the passage best supports the author's point of view? All right. A, Rose drowned, weighed down by the heavy gold. B, Van Loo wrote her coded messages in invisible ink. C, she convinced her own family to free their slaves. D, she led hundreds of slaves to freedom in the North. Okay, so let's look at this again. In Spies in Petticoats, the author believes that female spies were clever and resourceful. That means they came up with good ideas. Which sentence from the passage best supports the author's point of view? Well, she drowned and was weighed down by heavy gold, so that isn't being resourceful or clever. Van Loo wrote her coded messages in invisible ink. Well, that sounds pretty clever. She convinced her own family to free their slaves. No, that's more a factual kind of thing. She led hundreds of slaves to freedom in the North. Again, that's factual. All right, so you mark that and let's look at 5. Below are 3 ideas from the passage. Women spies came from many different backgrounds. Women spies took great risks for their causes. Women spies passed along valuable knowledge. Circle one of the ideas, then write 2 sentences from the passage that show how this idea is developed in the text. Write your answer in complete sentences. Okay, so all 3 of these things happen in the story. You just pick one of them that you would like to go back and find passages, 2 sentences in the story that support that. Okay? All right, guys, you can do that, and I will see you tomorrow.